A genocide is defined when first coined by Raphael Lemkin: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions meant to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent childbirth in the group, or forcibly transferring children from that group to another group.
Genocide, as defined in Canada. It means an act or omission committed with intent to destroy, whether in part or in whole, an identifiable group of persons, as such that at the time and the place of its commission constitutes a genocide according to conventional international law or customary international law, or by virtue of its being criminal according to the general principles of law accepted by the community of nations, whether or not it constitutes a contravention of the law in time and place of its commission.
So, no matter what semantic games anybody might like to play while discussing the subject, the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada is nothing short of a genocide. Throughout our entire history, various Canadian governments have attempted to erase Indigenous presence on this land.
Did you know that until 1951 it was illegal for an Indigenous person to seek legal representation? Or that the RCMP and the Canadian governments have consistently used aggression as a way to address Indigenous concerns, legitimate concerns regarding land rights. 1995 Gustafson Lake standoff is a good example of that. The RCMP spread misinformation about the Chipewyan defenders of Secwepemc people, who were simply trying to defend their right to practice their culture. Instead, they were labeled as terrorists.
Or that the last residential school was in operation until 1996. The school whose purpose was to kill the Indian and the child. Part of a program that's continued nearly into the 21st century that has been directly called, in the final report for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, cultural genocide. The same school where children are abused physically, mentally, and even sexually.
How about the sterilization of Indigenous women and girls? Ever heard of Cat Lake First Nation? Or the Chemical Valley in Sarnia? How about the Oka crisis? That's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm not entirely sure if people are able to or ready to really comprehend the scope of this genocide.
The final report of Canada's National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women includes accounts of 2,380 individuals who were, are, and will always be affected by the systematic abuse of Indigenous peoples in this country. Those 2,380 are just the people who were able to have their stories heard. Think of the hundreds and thousands who were not able to get their stories out to the world. Canadian governments, institutions, and people have been systematically and deliberately killing Indigenous people, culture, and history. What good is lip service about reconciliation when all this is still ongoing? What good is a prime minister or a mayor getting up on a podium performing a land acknowledgement when everything they do negates everything that it represents? All eyes on Wet'suwet'en.
So you've probably been hearing a lot about the dispute going on between the RCMP, federal and provincial governments, and the Wet'suwet'en people up in northern BC over the proposed fracked gas pipeline by Coastal GasLink. This is a standoff between Indigenous and non-Indigenous land defenders versus various interests of the Canadian oil industries.
The Wet'suwet'en, whose unceded lands lie in northern BC, have always been vocal and active opponents of the pipeline that would pass through their territory. The 5 clans that make up the Wet'suwet'en have put up blockades to prevent the invasion of their territory and those that wish to put this pipeline through it. Back in January of 2019, the RCMP invaded one of these blockades and demolished it. They arrested, assaulted, and dehumanized the rightful stewards of this land.
The RCMP has called these land defenders radicals. The federal and provincial governments are adamant that this pipeline will go through and there's nothing anybody can say or do that will change their minds. In short, the powers that be have categorized the Wet'suwet'en people as illegitimate, illegal rebel rousers. What is happening up there is a gross abuse of power.
But none of this adequately addresses the core of what's going on here. which is a manifestation of the relationship that has existed between Canadian settler society and the Indigenous people of this land for as long as there's been any such thing as Canada. It is a mistake to treat this as a simple political dispute. What we're trying to say is that people can call it whatever they want, but what's happening up there, what's really happening under all the semantics, is a genocide of cultural identity, lands, and of people. This is not a term to be thrown around lightly, no, but it even meets the definition provided by the Canadian government, the perpetrators themselves.
The RCMP set up their own exclusionary zone, might as well call it a blockade, and it was meant to deny entry to media and anybody else that wanted to enter, including residents. They're allowing people in through now, but they weren't at one point. But they did allow in a rebel media journalist, some numbnut who is a known white supremacist. I'm not gonna name him here. But that's interesting, isn't it? The RCMP is bootlicking Coastal GasLink and jeopardizing the sites that are culturally and spiritually important to the Wet'suwet'en people. They're denying food and important resources to get to the land defenders, which is also jeopardizing their well-being and health. Trying to evict them from their own unceded lands, their own homes.
So now what? Well, we're not going to tell you that direct action is necessary, but the 12 Indigenous youth who occupied the Minister of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources office and who was subsequently arrested did wake up a lot of people. We're not going to tell you to protest or go join the blockade, but we will tell you that the RCMP is ready to kill Indigenous peoples. And Canada tends to pay a lot more attention when white bodies are in danger of being killed than when brown bodies are killed. We're not going to tell you to call and write to your MPs, MLAs, and ministers, but we can tell you that putting direct pressure on corporate bootlickers tends to make them worry that maybe they won't get elected again. By no means do we claim to speak on behalf of the Wet'suwet'en people, but we do have a simple appeal to our elected representatives and to the Canadian justice system. Withdraw your RCMP and end the illegal occupation of Wet'suwet'en lands.
Silence is not an option, and in solidarity, we will prevail.